Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Councilmember Rue Landau. Education correspondent Lisa Haver will walk us through the unusual circumstances of last week's education nominating panel, and Lance Haver will report on the latest SEPTA board meeting. So let me bring up Lisa Haver here on the show. Lisa, how are you tonight?
Larry, good to see you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And we have this isn't what we were originally going to talk about this week. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened last week and why that was so unusual?
Well, it happened very quickly. And the reason that we, the members of the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools, knew about it is one of our members every single day for the past 10 years has looked at the legal notices in the Inquirer. And we started that because of, you may remember 10 years ago, Bill Green scheduling a meeting at former SRC chair Bill Green scheduling a meeting at the last minute to cancel the PFT contract. So we look at those notices every day. And we saw, it's just a little tiny notice buried in those, in the classified ads. And it was really unclear. It was like nominating panel, time and date, helped shape Philadelphia schools. We weren't sure what that was because we had been through this in 2017 when, the SRC was dissolved and we were getting ready to formulate a new school board. And it was a lot different than under Mayor Kenny. We actually, APS was part of an alliance, the 215 Alliance. And we actually, along with other advocates, had a say in who was on the nominating panel. As a matter of fact, Kendra Brooks was part of 215 Alliance. She was on that nominating panel. So it was a process and people knew about the process. This was just like, time and date. And as I said, it was just a little teeny ad. I don't really know. We don't get press releases. I don't know if they put out a press release, but I know that at least one reporter who was there told me she was there because we sent out a press release to talk about the issues. It didn't say, it didn't have an agenda. It didn't say, here's how to sign up for public testimony. It didn't say whether it would be live streamed. When we called the mayor's office, could not find a single person who knew what we were talking about. They say, hold on, try to find somebody. Couldn't find anybody. Twice, this was both Wednesday and Thursday. Thursday was the day of the panel meeting. Both days we tried to call. We were told somebody will call you back. So-and-so will call you back. Nobody called us back. Mm-hmm. We finally figured, well, let's try some members of city council. And we tried 2 members of the education committee, including the chair, Isaiah Thomas. Nobody in his office knew of it. So it was really puzzling. And then, we get to City Hall because we have the notice there with us. And there's one entrance to City Hall, which is now on the west side. And the guard saying, I don't have that here, and was not going to let us in the building. And we had them call upstairs. No, we don't know anything about it. We finally called the office of Councilmember Kendra Brooks and had to put the phone right up and give it to the guard. And that's how we were let into the building. Now, so I would say this is not exactly a great effort on the part of the mayor to inform the public of what is going on.
So the only way I found out about it was a press release that came out on Thursday, day of the meeting. And Denise and I were, Denise Clay Murray, colleague here on the show, we were at City Council, and I saw the press release, and I leaned over to Denise and I said, "Did you know about this?" And she said, "No, did you know?" And if neither one of us knew, it's possible one of us might have missed something, but we thought, oh, something's strange here. And the fact that you couldn't get into the building is also alarming to me, and that nobody knew about this thing.
I mean, you could start to get paranoid, because when we finally got up to the mayor's reception room, there were a lot of people in there. And we kind of wondered how they knew about it and how they got into the building. I want to stress that these meetings are important. I mean, this definitely sounds like a Keystone Cops approach to government, but we focus on Harrisburg. We get funding from Harrisburg. We just had, the governor talk about his budget. We've had the fair funding, basic education funding lawsuit. But when we get that money, as usual, we have to decide how we're going to spend that money. And that is the Board of Education. Mm-hmm. And I don't really think there's enough focus on the board in the local press. The 9 members of the school board control a $4.5 billion budget. Yeah. Just in comparison, the city's budget is 6.2. School budget has a 4.5 annual budget. They decide on new charter applications, charter renewals, possible closure of neighborhood schools, which they have alluded to already. And, they make decisions that, whether you have children in schools or not, affect every community. Mm-hmm. and affect, the future of the city's children. So what the school board does is very important. And who's on that board is really important. And to conduct this process in a way that shuts people out is a clear message to people. Again, in 2017, we went through this whole process and we were able to say, here's who we want on the nominating panel. People submitted their applications. Then Kenny shut down the whole process. And this is what Parker intends to do. We confirmed this with one of her representatives there that day at the meeting. They're going to have all the nominating panel meetings in executive session. And all that is a clear violation of the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act. I mean, it's really not any kind of into the weeds legal matter. It's a clear violation of the Sunshine Act. Every public body in a public meeting has to be open to the public and has to take public testimony. There are exceptions. So when that governmental body is discussing legal matters or personnel issues, then you can go into executive session. Now, the city under Kenny and now under Mayor Parker are saying choosing members of the school board is personnel matters. Well, I mean, they know that the members of the school board are not employees of the school district. They are members of the governing body. And as they remind us often, they are volunteers. Mm-hmm. So this is not in any way a personnel matter. And this process, needs to be opened up to the public. These are public schools. The public has a right to say what it is they want, especially since we are already disenfranchised. We are not allowed to vote for our school board, unlike every other district, with the exception of Chester Upland. That's another story. All the districts, in the tri-state area, all the districts in Pennsylvania, we're the only ones. We are disenfranchised. And you would think given that the mayor would want to make sure that we have as much of a say as possible, yet we're becoming more disenfranchised. We're not even allowed to know what's going on, let alone have a say in what's going on.
Right. And it's one of those things where, again, you hope that transparency and inclusiveness is what we're going for here, but clearly it's not. And you were not allowed to speak at that meeting.
No, I tried. As I said, there was no agenda posted before the meeting. We got there and there was an agenda and there was no public testimony on it, which we figured would be the case because there wasn't any way to sign up ahead of time. So the only thing we could do is stand up at the end of the meeting before the meeting adjourned and say, I want to speak. I want to have something to say. I'm a member of the public. I'm a member of the community. And, we were just shut down. I said, does anybody on the panel want to know how the community feels, or does the mayor want to know how the community feels? And, I was just stared at by 13 pairs of eyes.
Now, after that, did you get a chance to speak with anyone and ask, why was there not proper notice about this? Why was it done in this fashion?
We did speak to one of the mayor's representatives both before and after the meeting, and it was friendly and cordial, but they're not there to really give you a lot of information. What we did ask specifically was, is Mayor Parker going to follow what Mayor Kenny did and make all these meetings, put them all in executive session? He said yes, and that's what the city law department decided. So we are going to try to get copies of those decisions. And I tell you what's also troubling about this, Larry, is there were no stories in the paper about this.
Mm-hmm.
There's been these stories recently. Helena Bean just did a great column about how Mayor Parker is shutting down communication and making it even more difficult for the citizenry, the people of Philadelphia, to know what's going on. And there were reporters at this nominating panel meeting, but nobody did a story on the issues that we brought up. I mean, the Inquirer did a story like, well, here's who's on your nominating panel, but I didn't think it really went into all the things that we're talking about. And I find that concerning, because if the mayor is allowed to do all this and nobody pushes back, obviously she's going to keep doing that.
Well, and it's also part of a startling pattern just this week. We saw that the administration put out an edict saying every social media post has to come through the Office of Communications for every city department.
Right.
I don't think there are enough people in that office to handle every single social media post from every department across the city. Now, they rescinded that for certain things. One of the issues that I kept seeing over and over again on social media were people talking about libraries. Right. Just letting you know when story time is going to be. And, right. And I don't understand how that's a controversial thing at all. At least it shouldn't be. And, I don't understand the mindset where you're I don't even, censorship is one word for it, but it's overzealous censorship, to a degree that just, to me, doesn't make any sense and logistically isn't feasible. So I don't understand where this is coming from.
Well, it is ironic that this happened with the free libraries. It's supposed to be a source of information, and then you get an edict saying you can't put out information. Or the public schools, which is also supposed to be about people getting information and communicating. And I mean, the message could not be any clearer from the mayor. She does not want to hear from people about who's on the school board. And that is the local governmental body. I mean, in a lot of ways, they're just as important as city council. Mm-hmm. And why would you not want to know? And I find it really concerning because, I also wrote, and we talked about her education subcommittee, mm-hmm. which is really heavy with charter operators and charter investors. Is she going to, and as a matter of fact, Dawn Chavus, who's a charter lobbyist and charter advocate, I'll say. And she's also the wife of President of City Council, Kenyatta Johnson. She's on the mayor's education subcommittee, and she's also on the mayor's nominating panel. Well, I mean, do we have to worry about a lot of pro-charter people being on the school board? Of course, there should be a balance. There are people now on the school board who have voted. I mean, individual people who have voted on both sides of the issues. Some people lean more heavily towards approving a charter renewal. Other people on the other side. But I mean, if it's going to be charter heavy, it's really going to be a problem. And if people are not heard, because one of the things that used to be said about charters during the whole expansion was, parents are voting with their feet. Well, I mean, if you want to still believe that, APS did that report a couple months ago that showed that over half of the district's charter schools are under-enrolled. I mean, and some very significantly under-enrolled. So obviously, we really don't need any more charter schools. Well, is it going to be a board that is charter heavy and we're going to just keep getting more charter schools? That's going to endanger the actual neighborhood public schools. So, I mean, and that's just one issue. There's a lot of issues. Are we just going to have people in there who are going to carry out the mayor's? It seems to be one education issue, which is year-round schools.
Which isn't possible.
It's not. I mean, I don't like to say things are impossible. What I say is, in all of my years of going to board meetings and then SRC meetings and then board meetings, I do not recall anyone ever saying, you know what we need to fix the school district? Year-round schools. People talk about leveling. They talk about toxic buildings. They'll talk about why is the school bus picking up my kid? There's a million issues, and not once did I hear anybody say what we need is to spend money on year-round schools.
So, what actually did happen at this meeting? What was the point really, and then was anything decided?
Well, turns out that they had to meet on February 1st because that was the deadline for this panel to meet if the mayor wanted to make any changes in the school board. And that's probably one of the reasons why this was so rushed. If that panel didn't convene by February 1st, they were done for 2024. And she's been kind of, coy about what she's going to do with the school board. But if she's convening the nominating panel, she's obviously going to be doing something with the school board. So it was 13 people, and there was a presentation that actually was mostly like an information session for the people in the nominating panel. And as I pointed out, it was just one table of 13 people, and there were maybe 2 or 3 mics on the table, but most of the time the panel members didn't bother to. So if you were in the audience, you really couldn't hear what they were saying. And then they elected officers, and then we were done.
All right. So what is the next step in this nomination process?
So between February 1st and February 15th, people can send in applications if they want to be on the school board. The next meeting of the panel will be March 12th. And at that time, they have to have a list of names. I believe it is 27 names that they're going to submit to the mayor. And they will have interviewed those people. So they collect the applications and they interview certain people and they send that list to the mayor. If the mayor doesn't like any of the people, any of the candidates that's sent by the panel has to reconvene and come up with some more people. That's going to take place on March 12th. And as I said, even if they say, okay, we'll have some public testimony at this one, what are you supposed to say when all the decisions other than the mayor's final decision has already been made?
Yeah. All right. And where can people learn more about the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools?
We're on Twitter. We have a website, appsphilly.net, and we're going to be writing about this. And we are in the process of discussing possible legal action to stop the nominating panel from going into executive session. It is clearly illegal and a violation of the Sunshine Act. Yeah. Because I will say it again, the members of the Board of Education are not employees of the school district. They are asking to be on a governmental body. The members of the public have every right to know who's going to be representing them, the same way they have a right to know who's going to be on city council or any other legislative body.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us, and you'll be back again with us in a few weeks with more education news, and probably we'll be talking more about this very topic.
I'll keep you posted, Larry. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Lisa. And now what we'd like to do is play the interview we recorded with freshman council member Rue Landau, who is, I think tomorrow will be her 4th city council meeting. But she's already hit the ground running. So she's going to tell you a little bit about what she's doing and why she's doing it. So here's our interview with Rue Landau. All right, Councilmember Rue Landau, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I have to ask you this question first. And we've talked a little bit about this in the past when we had you on when you're a candidate. But I just want to bring it up again. What made you want to run for council?
Oh, that to me is an easy question. And it's that, I've been doing work to help people in Philadelphia for my entire career, whether it was being a lawyer at Community Legal Services or when I was running the Human Relations and Fair Housing Commissions, enforcing the civil rights and housing laws. I've been doing a lot of this over my career, and I just wanted to continue it, especially in this capacity, being able to introduce my own resolutions, to hold my own hearings, pass my own laws, and make change that I think I'm not going to do anything just to make a splash. I want to do something to effectuate real change. So I have experience inside city government, and including a place where I was enforcing laws other people were passing. And I have a lot of experience working with council people to pass those laws. So I'm going to still be a bridge. I never want something we're doing to fail just because we didn't talk to the administration and help them to effectuate the change we all want to see.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but working with council is probably a lot different than being on council. How do you prepare for that role? And is it a lot of talking? Is it a lot of meetings? What do you do to get ready to be an actual council member?
That's a great question. I've known a lot of them for a long time because I have worked with council and I've been in a lot of spaces where they've been in. It's really all relationships. That's it. And thankfully I have long-term relationships with most of them. Just a few of the folks I'm just getting to know now, we're building our relationships now. But I think when there's trust of who you are and what your intentions are, it's easy to get some good work done. I think it's when you're not trusted or believed or questioned, it's harder. And I think that even works even when you're on opposite sides of an issue, right? Someone might not be on the same side of an issue as me, but if I trust their intentions, I'll know they're doing the right thing they think needs to happen. And we just won't agree on the issue versus questioning why are they doing it. And I think it's the same with me. So what's it like on the inside? We are all getting along. We are, I'm having one-on-one meetings with everybody so I can get to know them personally, even closely, even more close. And just trying to find out what their priorities are and what we can partner on. That's been one of the things I'm doing from the jump. I'm trying to partner with people and co-introduce legislation so that we could do it together. Certainly, I think our staffs appreciate it to have, multiplying the minds and bodies doing the work. And also it shows that, there's more of us on certain sides of issues. And I think it's important that the city see that we can work together. Different from before, because I don't think council was working super well together before for a variety of reasons. The previous administration was very siloed, and I think this is an opportunity for us all to work together.
So you are the incoming chair of the technology committee. Can you tell us a little about how you intend to run that committee?
Yeah, that's been a sleeper over the years. I think I'm not sure it's utilized. We want to use it to make sure that I think the easiest way for us to use it is to get data, and data that can inform the change that we need and want to see. We want to hold hearings on a variety of issues too that are up and coming that we have to be cautious about and embrace a little, like artificial intelligence, right? And this will be the place where we'll get all that as much information as we can for the city. But the first way in which I'm using it is to collect data, to find out. We've had issues for a long time here in Philadelphia, and some of the issues don't seem to be improving. So when we know about things like what's happened, what was the circumstance, what have we done since we've known about it, and what do we still need to do? And I think a lot of that data can come out of the Information and Technology Committee, and we can make a plan and make the change happen.
And I think, every day that goes by, technology becomes more and more important, more and more antiquated. So I think there's a lot that maybe we need to catch up on there.
Right.
So that's good to hear. You're also go ahead.
And with one more thing that I think, the city is very behind in technology. Everybody knows that. I worked for the city for many years. We're behind. And when living in the siloed world they were in, sometimes one department has great technology on something and another one doesn't, or they each have their own level of technology, but they don't talk to each other. And what I think we can do is start uncovering where a lot of these barriers are and seeing what we can pull together. That's not just good for the city administration to talk to each other, but something that could be good for all of the residents in the city as well. How many times have you wanted to know, when is your park or your recreation center open, and when's your library open? You're going to different sites. You're trying to figure, why is that not in all one place? Let's try to get all of that in one place for all residents.
I think people would be very open to that, because you have to search in different places for different things now, and it can take time. And if you don't know where to look, that's a whole other thing. You're also vice chair of the housing committee, and we've already seen some important legislation come through city council. You have a strong background in housing. Can you tell us a little bit about what your work on that committee may entail? And then, a little broader, what do we need to be doing as a city in these next 4 years to make sure we have housing equity for people?
Yeah, I'll answer the last part first. We need much more real affordable housing for the income level that we have here in Philadelphia. That is the number one answer. Most people cannot afford where they live. The federal government has set out a standard that you should only pay 30% of your income in rent, and they offset that with a little bit for utilities. Most people in Philadelphia are paying at least 50% of their income, if not more, in rent. And that is something we don't have. People aren't earning enough money right now to pay for the housing that they need to have, and they're doubled and tripled up, and they don't have a place to call their own. So there's been certain bills that are introduced. What we're trying to do is take each piece as it comes, right? We've got a low-income homeownership issue, and we have low-income rental issues. We have a significant need of things of transitional housing that will get you to longer term housing, right? Like the way you see this is somebody who might be on the verge of homelessness or just stepping into it who needs to actually get into some version of transitional housing. Maybe they have mental health issues, maybe they have addiction issues, maybe they have other things, get them into a bridge that gets them into longer term housing. And it costs money, and we have to figure out how to pay for this. And we need to figure out, also, how are we paying for this how are we paying for the absence of affordable housing, right? Are we putting that money into shelters? Are we arresting people? Are we taking, families apart that should be reunited? All of that has a cost. And then how much does the housing cost? Because sometimes I think we're putting so much money into places of all of these other entities, shelters and whatnot, where we could just be paying for somebody's housing or helping them. Councilmember Jamie Gaudier has introduced a series of bills called Defying Displacement. It's a campaign, and I was very happy to co-sponsor them. And we're going to be looking at these issues. And what we want to do is not only keep people in the housing, in affordable housing, but also to make sure that when neighborhoods are changing, when neighborhoods start gentrifying, that long-term people who live there can stay there. And that is absolutely true for homeowners. And we're going to make sure the best of our ability. It's a little harder with renters, but we're going to make sure that it's true for renters as well. Just because your neighborhood changes doesn't mean that you've been living there for 20, 30 years, sometimes generations. You should be able to stay.
All right. I'd like to bring Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Home Monitor.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember, for giving us some of your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you again.
Good to see you too. Speaking on the topic of housing, one of the things that caught my eye in the Defying Displacement package of legislation was the part that concerned housing vouchers. For years, it's kind of been a problem for people who have vouchers to be able to use them with the housing that's available to them. You have neighborhoods where people have basically used the prospect of Section 8 folks coming to live there because they have a voucher as a means of, bringing down the neighborhood. How can we as a city approach landlords in a way where we get them to understand that, this is free money you're leaving on the table, and no, these people are not necessarily going to tear up your place because they're using a voucher to pay for it.
Right. Well, first thing to say is you're absolutely right about the money part, which is interesting. From all the Section 8 landlords who I've known over the years, I used to represent solely like subsidized housing tenants. They loved that 70% of their rent was coming automatically from the government to them. You don't have to worry about a tenant who lost a job, got ill, whatever. 70% of the rent for that household is automatically coming. 30%, maybe there might be a hiccup every once in a while, but it is, as you're saying, guaranteed money. I think that one of the things that I wanted to do, as I talk about, as somebody who can see issues from all sides and have relationships on all sides, I want to make sure that we're working with the landlords to make sure that they understand all of their obligations and all of the ways in which we also want to work with them and we want to help them. None of this should be a gotcha for landlords or any small business in the city of Philadelphia. We need to make sure that they're educated and they have the resources that they need in order to make sure, and that the help that they need, the support they need is what I mean, in order to effectuate this for themselves. So we have more mom and pop landlords in Philadelphia than most major cities in America, and we want to keep them here. So if there's a way we can support them through the process, that's helpful. But I want to touch on something else you say, which is also about just stereotypes and misinformation. There was some years ago, there was an article, there was some report that happened in the Northeast about like this whole neighborhood was going down, Section 8 landlords, Section 8 was coming into the neighborhood, and they did a study to find out they weren't Section 8 tenants at all. Whatever was happening in that particular neighborhood, they weren't Section 8. And I really don't folks shouldn't be stereotyped based on their income, right? This is folks who need Section 8 are just lower income people who are just getting a little help. In the code, it used to be called, it is still called, you can't discriminate against people based on their source of income. And it was at first inferred that housing choice vouchers were a part of that. And now it's explicit that housing choice vouchers are something that you cannot discriminate against. And now this new bill is going to add some of the protections more explicitly.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the importance of data and how data can be used to inform other decisions we make as a city. Where else should we be concentrating our search of data in terms of solving a city problem? And I guess, how do we get there?
There's so much. There's so many places to look here. I mean, maybe I could start by talking about my 57 blocks resolution that I put in, 57 plus blocks resolution. Back in 2021, the Inquirer did this great report showing that there are 57 blocks in Philadelphia that have had 10 or more shootings. And then that number has grown to 80, 87, 89 blocks. And so we call it the 57 plus blocks coalition. I've worked with the coalition for the past couple of years. And the thing, some of the things that they uncovered is on the blocks is there's abandoned houses, abandoned cars, and a lack of street lighting. We know that every few years, some well-financed university will come out with a study that says, hey, wait a second, all you have to do is clean and green a block and violence goes down. And I think this is the reason why I started with this particular resolution, is to say, wait a second, we have these studies that show us this is all we have to do. And what have we done about it? We need to figure this out. The number of blocks has grown. And so not only do I want to look at the elements that we already knew existed, but I want to look at additional factors as well. So for example, how many people on the blocks are renters? How many are owners? Are the banks in the neighborhood lending? Is this something that we should use the Community Reinvestment Act to tell the banks they need to lend in that neighborhood? There's so many questions that we have. Is there green space nearby? Is there a park? Is there access to fresh food? How's SEPTA doing? And I think when we get this larger picture of what's really going on, we will be able to come to a larger determination and an action plan. We're going to bring together subject matter experts who are everybody from community people on the ground to like real data folks who, count numbers all the time, but do it for good, and bring them all together and see, can we come up with a plan? Like, let's solve this problem. We all want the problem solved. We know it. So let's get the information and let's come up with an action plan, and then we can execute it.
Now, one of the things that we focus on a lot on this show is poverty. And I remember I went to a press conference that District Attorney Larry Krasner did that talked about the 57 blocks problem, where he said if you overlay a map of the 57 blocks where the most gun violence is going on in the city, and you overlay that map with a map of the most impoverished sections of the city, they would pretty much be the same map. Mm-hmm. So how do we, I guess, should we also be looking at the data regarding poverty with this problem? And if so, what would you like to see council, if not council and the mayor's office, do to tackle that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We need to look at poverty. And the most important thing, that the maps are really going to show what we already know, that the areas in Philadelphia that were originally redlined are the areas with the greatest amount of violence and poverty, right? So what we're looking at here is intentional government disinvestment for decades that we now need to intentionally reinvest back in the neighborhoods. I think we both have a moral obligation for this. There's a, there's political obligations. There's all sorts of things here, but it is like, if we want to, what I would like to see is a very anti-racist government where we are actually fixing harms of the past. And I want us to fix those harms. I want us to heal. I want us to have really tough conversations around it. And so for me, that is where the intentional acts that we have to do now are as intentional as what the folks were doing back in the 30s and with the original redlining maps.
Okay, now my last question is about your current experience in council. Is there anything about that surprised you? I mean, now that you've been on council for a little bit, is there anything that has, you know, been part of your experience in council that has been a surprise to you?
I'm not going to tell you a surprise. I'm going to tell you an adjustment, a very favorable adjustment that's made me happy. Council President Kenyatta Johnson starting on time is shocking. And I'm loving it. But, you know, I used to come to council for years, and I will tell you, it was very frustrating as somebody. I have a full-time job. I am coming to either testify or to support people or to do something. You never had a timeline for how anything would happen. It would take the full day. I mean, to be honest with you, with technology, being able to be on your phone and actually do work while you were waiting to testify was very helpful. What was it, a decade before when we didn't have this, or I don't know the math, 2 decades before, you would just sit there all day, and it is just so refreshing to have us start on time. So that's a good one. It's really been a great experience. I am, you know, I think some you're going to see some really good and positive and wonderful things happening as well. I think we're not always going to agree and we're not always going to get along. But I think everyone's going to be able to respect each other, and no big surprises yet, but some pleasant ones, like starting on time.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, and you're still listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. And Councilmember Landau, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate you.
All right. We'd like to thank Councilmember Rue Landau for joining us on the program. And now I'd like to bring in Lance Haver.
Good evening. That was a great interview. It might be a low bar, though. Starting on time is the pleasant surprise.
Yeah, but they have been starting on time, so we'll give them that. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. I'm sorry that Denise is a little under the weather, and I will do my best to fill in for her, although, of course, I cannot replace her.
Of course. So we have a couple of things going on here, Lance. What do you want to start with?
Well, I think as long as we're talking about council and the new council members, last week we reported on one of the new council members talking about he didn't work for the mayor, the council president, or even the taxpayers because he was a preacher. And I know that you had a chance to talk to him about that. So I think our viewers would be interested in hearing his response.
And before we play that, you know, we've been hearing this from a decent amount of people have been asking me about this. The day of, right after it happened, and then all through last week. So it got us to the point where we had to ask about it. You know, something like this happens. Our people want to know about it. We want to know about it. So I caught up with him before the meeting last weekend, and this was our conversation. So regarding the speech last week, with the notion that you do not report to the taxpayers, can you explain that a little bit for us?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I think the line that I read in that speech was, I do not work for the council president. I do not work for the mayor. I don't even necessarily work for the taxpayer. I serve a higher hope, a deeper devotion. It is to, you know, whatever you may call it, God, whatever the language may be. And so for me, as a person who is a taxpayer, who is a citizen in this republic, at the end of the day, whether I am elected official now or in the years when I'm not elected official, I have to have a value set that informs the decisions that I make and the actions that I take. And that is not necessarily dictated by the person who oversees the body, the one who is currently elected. or the taxpayers that may live here this year and move out the next. There's a deeper authority that I heed to that kind of guides and informs my life, and I find that it is often in the best interest of human persons. As we say in our office all the time, what we're trying to do is make sure that we are measurably and materially improving the lives of working people in this city. That's what my God or whoever it is, or whatever language you may use, informs me and tells me to do, to make sure that we are helping to improve folks' lives. And so that's what I mean when I say that. It's not so much a denial of the responsibility that I have to make sure that we are taking care of our citizenry and our taxpayers, but in fact, my deeper devotion informs that I must actually do well by the taxpayer and by those in the city.
Okay, so taxpayers shouldn't feel strange about coming to you with concern.
Oh, no, please do.
Because that's another thing we keep hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah.
It's all right. So that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that's changed my problem with it. I don't know how many of our viewers have read the book Under the Banner of Heaven. Now, granted, it's a different religious orientation. It is the fundamentalist Mormon Latter-day Saints. But in that book, it's clear that there are people who believe that they are serving God, and in their role of serving God, that they have to go out and murder people who, in their opinion, are not serving God. And anyone, while I probably agree with the overall religious beliefs of the pastor, the idea that an elected official doesn't serve the citizens but serves his or her interpretation of God is deeply troubling in a republic that has a separation of church and state. And I'm not sure why he's unable to recognize that people who hear God's voice differently, if they were to say what he said, he would be horrified, because some of those people believe that we shouldn't have any safety net. Some of those people believe we shouldn't allow women's reproductive rights. Some of those people believe that we shouldn't allow people with different sexual orientation, gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexuals, to get full rights. And if one says, I don't have to follow the citizens, I don't have to follow the Constitution, I don't have to follow the laws of the Commonwealth, city, state, what one says then is, however one hears God is sufficient. And that's really not what our republic is based on. I hope that as he matures as a council member, this is only his really second or third week, I hope that he takes into consideration that book Under the Banner of Heaven, and how scary it is for those of us who believe in the separation of church and state to hear an elected official say, I only answer to God and everyone else is secondary, and it's my interpretation of God that matters, and not what people want, not what the community needs. I get my focal point, my decision-making, my abilities to decide what's right and what's wrong from my relationship to God.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see what happens over time. I did have a few other things to talk about. Did want to make a brief report about SEPTA. Two things. One is the SEPTA board announced that they were going to postpone the decision about the bus revolution till this Thursday. They've now announced once again that they're postponing it. Now, at the last meeting of the SEPTA board, we played a little bit of the council majority leader getting up and saying that the new mayor, the new council, the new committee on transportation do not believe that they have had enough time to review the bus revolution proposals, and we're asking for more time.
Yeah.
As background again, SEPTA has 80% of the system is in Philadelphia. 80% of the local match is from Philadelphia. But the SEPTA board only gives Philadelphia's representatives 13% of the votes.
Yeah.
So it's 2 members from every one of the counties, Bucks, Delaware, Chester, Montgomery, and Philadelphia. A majority leader, minority leader of the state house, majority leader, minority leader of the state senate, and a governor's appointment. So the city really is overwhelmed at the board, and in some attempt to make it somewhat more equal, the Philadelphia representatives to the SEPTA board have a veto power. If the 2 of them vote a veto. And I participated in some of these earlier court cases where they actually have to say it. That stops anything from going forward. The new Mayor Parker, the new council president Johnson have yet to make their appointments to the SEPTA board. The idea that the SEPTA board was going to push this down the throats of the new administration and new council seems to be unwise, especially when you recognize that 80% of the money has to come from Philadelphia Council. I also want to just comment, and normally I wouldn't do it because referring to an editorial writer from the Philadelphia Inquirer normally is one of those things that's like flypaper. You just get stuck with it. But there's an editorial writer who is very active on X, formerly known as Twitter, Dan Pearson, and he's actually opined that our elected officials should stop interfering with SEPTA. And I'm not sure how one can seriously consider themselves any type of knowledgeable person about how democracy works when someone says, well, the elected officials shouldn't have anything to say about a public institution that it's funding. I don't know who these people at the Inquirer editorial board believe should be responsible for running SEPTA. But clearly, Mr. Pearson doesn't believe it should be the elected officials. He goes so far as to claim that that Philadelphia City Council didn't have any interest before. And obviously, he doesn't read his own newspaper, or he would have known that Philadelphia City Council had hearings on the bus revolution, made very strong recommendations. And again, Mr. Pearson's own newspaper didn't bother to write about the SEPTA board's decision to postpone the bus revolution vote because Council Majority Leader Catherine Gilmore Richardson showed up and spoke. And for those of us who have been following the SEPTA board and following local politics, it is incredibly unusual for a council person to show up in person to make an appeal.
It hadn't happened in a long time.
The only time I had seen it happen was when former Mayor Street showed up in the SEPTA board to oppose a doomsday scenario where the SEPTA board was getting ready to cut the service by 40%, to do away with all night service after 11 o'clock, and to raise fares by close to 50%. That was the only time I ever saw an elected official show up. Now, there may be other examples I can't remember, and there are times when an elected official will send a staffer, but to the best of my knowledge in the last 20 years, this is the only time a sitting council majority leader showed up in person to say, don't do it. And for that to be not actively participating, and Mr. Pearson from the Inquirer editorial board not to realize it, is really kind of shocking. And I know the Inquirer has problems, and one of the difficulties we face as a society is if we're not informed voters, we really end up in deep trouble. And the Inquirer, unfortunately, has seen its readership decline and decline and decline. Their decision to try and become a more conservative voice, to put on people from the Commonwealth Foundation as a way of building their readership, one, isn't working, but two, perhaps they should just look at someone like Mr. Pearson, who is providing incorrect information, who is opposed to democratic control of public institutions, and who actually ridicules elected officials for trying to represent their constituents. Maybe that's why people aren't reading the Inquirer. Maybe it wasn't because the positions were too liberal. It was because the positions were ridiculous. That being said, I also have some good news in the governor's budget about SEPTA. So now this again gets tricky. Last year, the governor tried to change the formula for the sales tax, so more of the sales tax would go to support public transit throughout the state. Now, Philadelphia Hall Monitor and our viewers and our readers are very Philadelphia-centric. But the truth is there are public transit systems throughout the state, whether it's the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton system, or it's the Altoona system, or the Bethlehem-Lehigh system. All of these systems, there's a system in Harrisburg, in York, in Lancaster, all of these systems face tremendous difficulties. And the governor put in the budget last year money to help all of them out. Now, when it came time for the governor to negotiate with the Republicans in the state legislature, he did chose to give up public transit. So while it's very good news that he's put $282.8 million in the statewide budget, which means Philadelphia get $160 million, it's very good news, but it's really not enough. And unfortunately, there's no guarantee that the governor's going to follow through on it. And I'm hoping that SEPTA will stop talking about the bus revolution, use all its resources to get its riders to contact our elected officials, especially those of us who live in areas where there are Republican elected officials, and say we desperately need SEPTA. I cannot get over the lack of storytelling of how many of the hundreds of millions of dollars that SEPTA gives out in contracts, that it goes to, some of it goes to local businesses, and that we don't tell that story, that this money goes to a local business that hires people in Chester, hires people in Montgomery County, hires people in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, and that story is not being told, and I'm not really sure why.
Mm-hmm.
There is other good news in the governor's budget, and this is something that we have talked about and reported on, and that is the governor is allocating money to eliminate medical debt. And this is following in what's happening in Connecticut. The state of Connecticut has allocated $4 million to do away with, they've allocated $6.5 million to do away with $1 billion worth of medical debt. Now, it's the same kind of formula. The money comes out of the COVID money that was released. Almost every state, including Pennsylvania, has a huge rainy, quote unquote, rainy day fund where they took the money and didn't use it. Connecticut's now taking the money and recognizing that people who got sick through COVID, many of them are left with very large medical debts. And the state of Connecticut under Governor Lamont is using a nonprofit to buy that debt up for really pennies on a dollar. Again, $6.5 million to buy $1 billion in debt.
It's unbelievable.
Right now, we have reported that nobody in the city is looking at that right now. Perhaps our council members knew that it was going to be in the governor's budget, but the governor has put in for $4 million to buy the equivalent amount of debt that they're doing in Connecticut. It will be slightly less because the number that the governor is putting in is slightly less. Again, the difficulty that we see with Governor Shapiro is we now know that he will cave into the Republican legislators' demands. And many of the things that are in this budget are things that he must be willing to give up to make the deals, rather than do the hard work of getting people involved, of touring the state, of getting people in all the different areas who have medical debt to come out and tell their story, or people who ride public transit to come out and tell their stories. He's engaged in the kind of backroom negotiations that have been part of Pennsylvania government for over 50 years now, since the state constitution was passed. And while it's easier and it makes these elected officials much more important that they can make all their deals in a back room, it doesn't really help those of us who aren't there, who don't have a say over which deals are cut and which deals aren't cut. So good news and bad news. The good news is these things are in writing. The bad news is Governor Shapiro does not appear willing to go out and build the mobilization. In the bad old days, we used to have presidents who would have a budget, announce the budget, and then travel across the country selling it. We had people like Governor Rendell who were spokespersons for their own budgets, charismatic leaders who would go out and sell it. And now we have technocrats who, instead of trying to sell it, are interested in making a deal.
All right.
Well,
Lance,
that. And next week I'll report on car insurance.
great. Lance, thank you so much for that. We'll be keeping an eye on SEPTA. Councilmember Jay Young will be with us next week on the program, and we'll see you next week on Hall Monitor.